Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government has failed to deliver any cost-of-living relief for people. They didn't include anything in the budget to help with the cost of living. Right. So we gave the Sask Party the chance to vote on some much-needed relief. But, Mr. Speaker, the Sask Party voted that down. So I'll ask the Premier the same question that he asked me. How could you do that to Saskatchewan people?
Recognize the Premier.
That bothered you, eh?
Mr. Speaker, time and time again on the floor of this Assembly in the Rotunda, Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pride to speak to the opportunity that we have in Saskatchewan through the strength of a strong and vibrant and growing economy to ensure that we can have the $2 billion in affordability measures yet again in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker. Affordability measures that are making Saskatchewan communities some of the, if not the most affordable communities to live in across Canada, and that again is included in the budget documents, Mr. Speaker. I want to read in a quote. Mr. Speaker, I think we have one hell of a story to tell in this province about the quality of life, about the opportunity that's here. We need to be telling that story in an affordability crisis. We have some of the best rates as a province, the most affordable housing in the country, Mr. Speaker. That's from September the 13th, 2022, and it's the Leader of the Opposition.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I think that was before they hiked power bills 3 times. Mr. Speaker, not only are they failing to deliver on the cost of living, they're failing miserably when it comes to providing supports for kids with complex needs.
Sure are.
Mr. Speaker, we're joined today by 2 moms who have kids with complex needs. One of them is BJ Didick. BJ has 3 autistic children. One of her twins, Lucas, attends John Dolan School in Saskatoon. Her daughter, Lexi, attends a functional life skills support classroom, also in Saskatoon. Now, BJ knows that teachers and staff do everything they can to provide supports for kids with complex needs, but this province is not providing enough support. What does the Premier say to BJ about the lack of supports in classrooms for kids with complex needs?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I would say to BJ and to his family that have joined us here today, Mr. Speaker, this is a government that is investing, most certainly in the supports for our provinces, our communities' children, our families' children that may require additional supports, whether that be in the school, and we've discussed that funding level on the floor of this Assembly, the increase mid-year last year added to in this most recent budget again, that increase of 9% in operational funding, which includes over $350 million in supports right in our classrooms, in particular in those elementary grades, Mr. Speaker, is only possible due to the strength of the economy that we have here in Saskatchewan. In addition to that, and what we've seen in this year's budget yet again, is continued funding for individualized funding, Mr. Speaker, for parents and families and children that need additional supports, Mr. Speaker. But I would say this to BJ and to others across this province is we need to continue having this conversation and continue to look at how we can best fund those supports that are needed for families right across this family, whether they be in our schools or whether they be in our homes or whether they be in our communities, Mr. Speaker. And that's a conversation that this government and various ministers are always open to have.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he doesn't get an E for effort when he's failing our kids. And BJ isn't the only one here today. Katie MD lives in Midale, and she has 2 children with autism. And her son hasn't been able to attend school for 10 months because the supports that he needs simply aren't available at their local school. The lack of supports in local schools didn't happen by accident, Mr. Speaker. It's a direct result of that Premier's underfunding of our education system. Does the Premier think that it's acceptable that Katie's kids don't have the supports that they need in their local hometown school?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Premier said, we welcome both these families to their legislature today. I just first on the previous question, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity myself to tour John Dolan School earlier this year, Mr. Speaker, and to see the incredible work that Saskatoon Public Schools is doing at that specific school, in that specific school community for many of the most vulnerable kids in our province, Mr. Speaker. But when it comes to supporting kids all across the province, Mr. Speaker, the Premier referenced a 9% increase in educational operational funding across all 27 school divisions, Mr. Speaker. But when it comes to classroom supports funding, Mr. Speaker, that budget has increased 14% this year, Mr. Speaker. We know there's more work to continue doing, Mr. Speaker. That's why we've signed a multi-year funding agreement with the 27 school divisions, so that we can continue having these important discussions on how we support students in all corners of the province. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, these parents should be able to get the supports that their families need, but they can't because of this government's record of underfunding our education system. Now, when school divisions try to provide the needed supports, they aren't fully funded by this government. And nowhere is that more clear than a John Dolan school in Saskatoon Eastview. John Dolan is an amazing school with fantastic teachers and staff, and they serve some of the most high-need students in the province. But the Sask Party government doesn't fully fund those supports. Saskatoon Public Schools actually runs a $2.3 million shortfall to keep the doors open at John Dolan School. These parents who've joined us today, along with the teachers, the staff, and division leaders, all understand the value of investing adequately in the supports that their complex learners need. Why doesn't the Sask Party value and fund those supports?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said in my previous answer, I did have the opportunity to tour John Dolan back in January and speak with teachers in that school, Mr. Speaker. It's a conversation that I have regularly with Kim Strandon, the board chair at Saskatoon Public, as well as board trustees and board administration at Saskatoon Public Schools, Mr. Speaker. As I said in my previous answer, we have increased classroom supports funding significantly across the province in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker. We understand there's more work to do, Mr. Speaker, and we're committed to having those conversations, both with Saskatoon Public and any other division anywhere else in the province. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the minister was there to see John Dolan School for himself. I know that the minister before him was in John Dolan School, and the minister before him was in John Dolan School, and the former health minister was in John Dolan School, and I believe the minister for social services was in John Dolan School as well. Doesn't that say enough about the complexity of the needs that all those ministers have been there, but nothing has changed after those visits? John Dolan is a great school, and it serves 60 students with very complex needs. But there's also a long wait list to get in. There are 18 families on the wait list for John Dolan School, and many more in the province who cannot access the supports that their children need. What does the minister say to families who can't find a school that offers the supports that their children need?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite just said that nothing has changed, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to differ. As I have outlined in my couple previous answers, Mr. Speaker, there's been significant funding increases over the last several years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since 2018, operational funding has increased 24% to Saskatoon Public School Division. Mr. Speaker, Saskatoon Public received additional funding through the complexity dollars that we added in last year's budget as well, Mr. Speaker. And in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker, a significant increase to the operational funding available to Saskatoon Public. And then Saskatoon Public, and like any other school division, makes decisions on how those dollars are allocated in their school division to different school communities and to different programs that are offered to families in their community, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, that minister isn't disagreeing with me. He's disagreeing with Saskatoon Public Schools, and he's the one who asked them to speak up. Now, due to Sask Party underfunding, Saskatoon Public Schools spends $10 million more on supports for complex needs than they receive from that province each and every year. That means that division has to pull dollars from other programs to fund those supports. The division has warned, and I quote, "This deficit has a significant impact on the division's ability to address issues of classroom size and complexity." Class size and complexity, Mr. Speaker, is the issue in schools today. How can that minister say that this budget is adequate if just one school division is being shortchanged more than $10 million this year?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I have already outlined for the member opposite, over the last 6 years, Mr. Speaker, operational funding has increased to Saskatoon Public Schools 24%, Mr. Speaker, whereas enrollment has increased 16%, Mr. Speaker. Even in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker, the percentage across the province is 9% increase in operational funding, Mr. Speaker, but in Saskatoon Public, Mr. Speaker, it's over 10%. Mr. Speaker, I find the question from the member opposite very interesting. Would he leave it up to individual school divisions to make decisions on how to support classrooms, or would he put that in a collective agreement?
Exactly. Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This tired government and this out-of-touch minister are failing education.
That's right.
And speaking of unapologetic, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about their travel. Some of the most expensive travel in the history of this province. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Energy and Resources spent over $8,000 on just 3 heady nights in Toronto, and meanwhile, the Minister for CIC spent $3,500 more on ground travel than any other minister in his government on one chauffeured limousine tour around Paris, all on top of $1 million week in Dubai. Mr. Speaker, how does the Sask Party justify this indulgence when people in Saskatchewan are struggling?
You're here. Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Well, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, this government is proud of our record of international engagement and the export growth that has come along with it. Over the course of the last 17 years, Mr. Speaker, exports in this province in their last year were $16 billion. I can say they spent $1 million in travel that year, Mr. Speaker, 3 times more than we have ever spent in a single year on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. We have grown those exports to over $50 billion, Mr. Speaker, on a GDP of $78 billion, meaning we are exporting nearly 70% of every single dollar that is produced here in this province. We are going to be out there working with our job creators, working with our employers, working with our companies to sell those products around the world and attracting investment back here to Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. Conversely, when they spent $1 million traveling the world, they spent Saskatchewan taxpayers' dollars making terrible investments and losing that money.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Mr. Speaker, this is a minister that spent $1 million taxpayer dollars on a single week in Dubai. He hates talking about his record. And you know what else this government hates talking about, Mr. Speaker? Their carbon tax. Now, Mr. Speaker, in this year's budget alone, there are $280 million in revenues from the OBPS, but I'm going to call it what it actually is, Mr. Speaker, the Sask Party carbon tax. Combined with the money from last year, this means, Mr. Speaker, that the Sask Party is sitting on $568 million of ratepayer money. Hoarding these dollars, Mr. Speaker, like Scrooge McDuck, might help the Sask Party budget, but it doesn't help the budgets of the people of Saskatchewan. It doesn't help families struggling to pay their bills. So, Mr. Speaker, question for the minister. Why is he sitting on these dollars instead of providing cost of living relief today?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the simple answer is because if we did that, the federal government would take them back.
Yes.
Is the member opposite? Is it her position that those dollars would be better spent by Ottawa?
It is.
That those dollars would be better sent to Ottawa for them to decide? For the Liberal NDP coalition in Ottawa, their friends in Ottawa that they go to campaign schools for, that those dollars should stay in Ottawa, Mr. Speaker, and be spent by the federal Liberal NDP coalition. We've taken the position, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Saskatchewan, first and foremost, shouldn't be paying those dollars, but because they're forced to by the federal government, that we're going to make decisions in terms of how those dollars are spent. We're going to use those dollars to keep rates as low as possible, and we're going to use those dollars, Mr. Speaker, in the event that we do make an investment in small modular reactors.
Recognize Recognize a member from Regina University.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We heard it here first. That minister is trying to say that the feds, I don't know if it's Justin Trudeau, maybe it's Stephen Guilbeault, the feds are preventing him from using his Sask Party carbon tax slush fund to help people. He says, Mr. Speaker, he's ready to go to carbon tax jail over the home heating exemption. Yet somehow he's handcuffed by this deal that he signed with the feds to take over carbon taxing Sask Power. Does the minister really expect anyone in the province to believe him that his deal with Justin Trudeau is stopping him from helping people today? And will he release that deal today?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, Mr. Speaker, we're seeing pretty clearly the Leader of the Opposition a couple of weeks ago went to a Justin Trudeau campaign school, a Liberal campaign school in Ottawa, and we're hearing more from the member a couple of seats away from her, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that we think that the best solution for these dollars is first and foremost that they not have to be collected from the people of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. Short of that, Mr. Speaker, we think that the best use of those dollars are used by Saskatchewan residents, for Saskatchewan residents, and decided by the duly elected government of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. That's why we are going to use those dollars to help keep rates affordable. That'll be a decision that we make, not Ottawa, Mr. Speaker. And we're also setting aside dollars, Mr. Speaker, in the event that we do build small modular reactors in this province, Mr. Speaker, so that we can ensure that rates are affordable and that we have reliable power well into the future.
Recognize a member from Regina University.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That government had to Photoshop a picture of my leader to make it look like she was standing next to Justin Trudeau. But we do not need any Photoshop for a picture of that carbon tax-loving Sask Power minister standing next to the godfather of the carbon tax, Stéphane Dion. Now, Mr. Speaker, that minister didn't feel constrained by the law when he took the carbon tax off of home heating. But again, apparently he is handcuffed by the deal he signed with the feds when it comes to Sask Power's carbon tax dollars and using those to help people today. It's unbelievable, Mr. Speaker. Not only that, it's completely hypocritical. People in Saskatchewan hate the carbon tax, but they also hate hypocrisy. So, Mr. Speaker, to the minister, does he really believe that anyone in this province thinks that these dollars are better off padding their Sask Party budget rather than helping people with cost of living relief today?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, the reality is that if we don't follow that agreement, the federal government will cancel the agreement, and then there will be no dollars to return back to the people of Saskatchewan like she's asking for, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that hopefully the Leader of the Opposition has gotten off of hold with Jagmeet Jagmeet Singh's assistant, and that, Mr. Speaker, that if she would only stop going to campaign schools to re-elect the Liberal government, Mr. Speaker, that we can have a change in this country, Mr. Speaker, so that we don't have to pay the carbon tax anymore. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now, this might be a little esoteric for the backbench over there, but they don't have to take my word for it, Mr. Speaker. It's right there in black and white on page 48 of their own budget. $500 million of carbon tax padding their budget. All the while, 57% of Saskatchewan people can barely afford groceries. They can't blame Justin Trudeau for this one, Mr. Speaker. These are their carbon tax dollars, and this is their Sask Party budget. These are their choices. So, Mr. Speaker, a simple question. Are we really going to vote off a budget today with $500 million of carbon tax dollars and not a single penny of cost of living relief?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll just remind that member opposite and all the people of Saskatchewan that it was just a little bit more than 6 years ago to the day that this government launched its carbon tax challenge, Mr. Speaker, all the way to the Supreme Court. And the members opposite, they will recall that their response to that was that it was a pointless crusade. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't think they have any ground to stand on when it comes to their support for the Jagmeet Singh, Justin Trudeau carbon tax, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the reality is The reality is, without this agreement, Mr. Speaker, then Ottawa chooses how those dollars are spent, and it is obvious the position of that member opposite is that she would prefer Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh deciding on how Saskatchewan people's dollars are spent. We disagree with that every day of the week.
Recognize the member from Regina Walsh Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Greg East lives in Creighton, and he's frustrated by the changes the Sask Party has made to Crown land leases in the north. He's traveled a long way to be here today, and he wants to meet with the Environment Minister to have his concerns heard by the Sask Party government. Will the minister meet with Greg after question period today and hear his concerns?
Recognize the Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome Mr. East to the gallery, and of course I will meet with him following question period.
I recognize the member from Saskatchewan Rivers.
Mr. Speaker, that government is very proud of the population growth that they are overseeing. As they aptly point out, Saskatchewan is seeing the highest population growth and immigration rates in over a century. Mr. Speaker, they will say this record increase of people is great for the economy, but in reality it's overburdening our public services. They can't keep up with the demand. Hallway health care and record wait times are now the norm. Crime rates are out of control and classrooms are overcrowded, understaffed. Mr. Speaker, why is the government so committed to this record population growth when our province is struggling to keep up and provide for the residents we already have?
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Well, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that we are happy to talk about the population growth in this province. Record population growth, over 200,000 people have made Saskatchewan their home over the course of the last 17 years, something I would note that member used to be very proud of and speak about at least twice a year in this House in budget replies and throne speech replies, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, that has changed now that she has been sitting on the other side of the floor. That being said, this population growth has led to very, very significant economic growth in the province, record economic growth. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to work with partners across the province to make sure that population growth is sustainable, and we believe that it is.
Recognize the member from Saskatchewan Rivers.
Mr. Speaker, it's undeniable that Saskatchewan's public services are overburdened. We have some of the highest healthcare wait times in Canada. Education scores are suffering, as we hear every day, and student grade level performance is dropping. Our police services are struggling to keep up, dealing with a record low officer per capita ratio. Mr. Speaker, last year, international migration accounted for 93% of the province's population growth. Will this government commit to reducing these immigration rates until our public services stabilize and improve for Saskatchewan citizens?
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
I didn't hear the whole question, but what I think I heard was pretty troubling, Mr. Speaker. Pretty troubling. This is a province whose motto is for many people's strength, whether they be Indigenous Canadians who have been here from time immemorial to those who have moved and made this province their home, fleeing Russian oppression in the early 20th century, to those who, again, are fleeing Russian invasions in Ukraine today, Mr. Speaker. This is a place that welcomes those from around the world who are fleeing those sorts of terrible, horrible things and have contributed so much to our province, whether it be in the last 10,000 years, whether it be in the last 100 years, or whether it be in the last 3 months. We're going to continue that, Mr. Speaker, whether that member and that party like it or not.
Recognize the member from Saskatchewan Rivers.
Mr. Speaker, as I said before in the Assembly, the rural municipalities have been very clear about their position on CO2. It is not a pollutant, and net zero is destructive to our province. 95% of RMs voted for a resolution stating exactly that. Will this government find some common sense and stand with the people of this province against net zero? Or will they continue to slide with their globalist friends promoting this destructive net zero agenda?
Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Over the coming years, we are going to ensure that we have reliable and affordable power for the people of Saskatchewan. We're going to be doing so by taking all of the above approach when it comes to how we're going to generate that power, Mr. Speaker, and that will include some form of electricity generation that is net zero or non-emitting in terms of small modular reactors, Mr. Speaker, and some renewables that will be in the system. Mr. Speaker, I think Mr. Speaker, that's certainly the plan going forward. And I think, Mr. Speaker, I would just invite the member opposite, if she does have another question, Mr. Speaker, whether or not she is in support of adding nuclear into the generation mix for this province. I'd be interested in knowing the position of the member opposite.
I recognize the opposition House Leader.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Please state your point of order.
Speaker, during question period, when the member for Saskatoon Eastview was asking questions about supports for children at John Dolan School, the Minister of Justice yelled "not true" across the floor. Mr. Speaker, you've ruled on that type of language before. I'd ask that you find that unparliamentary and that she apologize and withdraw.
Recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I have canvassed members around. I don't think that would appear in Hansard. I'd invite the Speaker to review the record.
I will review the record and get back. I recognize the Government Deputy House Leader.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Please state your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, during question period, the member from Regina University referred to the Minister of CIC as unbelievable and hypocritical. Mr. Speaker, there have been rulings in this House with regards to this in the past. I would refer to the rulings from February 21st, 1961, as well as February 22nd, 1961. And I know there have been much more recent rulings than that. I would ask that the member from Regina University stand in her place, withdraw her comments, and apologize.
Good point of order.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I apologize and withdraw.
That's how